How we doing, everybody? We're on to Module 14 this week, talking about things that might happen after trial and after conviction and after sentencing. These are mainly related to appeals and things like that. We only have one more module after this module, which will be on specialty courts, like drug courts, juvenile courts, and all of these other types of specialty courts. They're starting DUI courts and things like that. We'll talk about that all next week. But for now, we're talking about what happens after conviction. So some people just go on and serve their sentence and do their time and move on with life. But some people decide to pursue other avenues. Maybe they feel they've been unjustly convicted, and people do get wrongfully convicted in the United States. So, this is justified in many cases. So basically what happens next after someone's tried and convicted and probably sentenced too, what they can do is they can file an appeal. And remember, I talked in the beginning of the semester when we were talking about structures of courts, about how you had the trial courts, and then you had kind of usually an intermediate appellate court, maybe a court of appeals in each state, and then you would have a higher, usually a state Supreme Court, and then if you didn't win any of those, you could even appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court if you wanted to, even though they're very unlikely to hear your case. So these are means of what are known as direct appeal. But you can actually file indirect appeals, which actually are this idea of challenging the state's authority to incarcerate you, to say that you're holding them unconstitutionally. And this is known as a writ of habeas corpus, or a habeas corpus petition. And so habeas corpus is Latin for you have the body, in case you all don't know. And so what you would do is you usually see these with death penalty cases. You rarely would see a habeas corpus petition take place for somebody that's just serving prison time, things like that. But you would oftentimes see them with death penalty cases, and that would be after they've exhausted all of their direct appeals. They would move on to that. And so basically, what your idea and what you're trying to say is, when you make an appeal, is to say that the lower court made some sort of legal error when you were being tried, and so therefore your conviction should be overturned and you should be retried, or something like that. One of the things about this is that you don't really have necessarily a right to appeal. In many states, you do have a right to that first level of appeal, and you can be heard by the intermediate, appellate courts, but you have no right to be heard by the state Supreme Court usually, and of course this varies across states, and you have no right to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court turns down the vast majority of people that appeal to them, and so one of the things that can occur, before I get to that, what will happen is when you're tried and convicted and you appeal, what will happen is your transcript, how the court reporter sits there and records everything that's said, all of this will be transcribed into a written transcript of what actually occurred during your trial. And when you appeal, all of that information gets sent up to the appellate court to review. And your lawyer and probably the prosecution will make arguments that, the trial, your lawyer will obviously make an argument that, some error occurred. The prosecution will probably make an argument that no error occurred, and then the appellate court will try to figure out whether an error actually occurred. Even if an error did occur, they can say that it was a harmless error and you would have been convicted anyway regardless of this error, and so they can still affirm that decision. And with that, it moves on to the outcomes. What they can do is they can affirm the lower court's decision, which means that they're upholding your conviction and you're going to prison. They can reverse the lower court's conviction and say, well, we're reversing this conviction and just outright throwing out your conviction, in which case you go free. But usually what will happen is they will reverse and remand, which means that they will reverse the conviction and then they'll remand you back to the trial court to retry you without whatever this error was. If there was some evidence that should have been excluded and it wasn't, then they'll say, well, you can retry them, but you can't use this evidence or this witness or whatever it was that occurred. I'm not going to get into all the rules of evidence about what's supposed to be going on during the trial and all that, because that's a topic for a criminal procedure class, and so we won't get into all of that for this course. But habeas corpus is actually a constitutional requirement. Under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2, challenges the constitutionality of one's confinement. Like I said, it is only available to incarcerated persons. You cannot file a writ of habeas corpus for a traffic ticket, for being fined or something like that. And so this is basically that, and if the court decides to issue this writ, then the prisoner is then brought before the court, and then they will be explaining why they've been there, why they should be let free, things like that. This goes all the way back to the Crown in England when they used to hold people, and sometimes without trial and things like that, so they put that into the Constitution to assure us some rights that we wouldn't be unconstitutionally held, and we had access to the courts to be able to hopefully release us if that happens. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this little intro video is the idea of clemency. And this, again, often happens with death penalty cases, but you see it with other cases as well. And so usually when you have, you've been sentenced to death, you'll file all your direct appeals after your trial, and then you'll file probably for a writ of habeas corpus. One of the last things you'll do is try to get some sort of pardon from the governor or for the president, to say that you should be pardoned, or maybe you can get a stay of execution, which just means that they're not really pardoning you, but they're just putting it off for a little while, maybe to conduct some sort of investigation to see if they should pardon you, or things like that. So this is also known as clemency. This power only rests with the President of the United States and the governor. Nobody else can pardon you. And so there was some recent discussion about, I can't remember his name now, Donald Trump's lawyer, and all of that drama, and whether he would be pardoned and all of these other things, and it seems as though he's not been pardoned, but they thought that he would get pardoned, or at least they were talking about this. A lot of legal scholars were like, well, he can just pardon him, and then he won't turn state's evidence against him. But of course now his attorney has given up all of the information, and he has not been pardoned. But some famous pardons are out there. You guys might have heard of some of these. Richard Nixon, George Steinbrenner by Reagan. He was, I believe, the Yankees owner. Patty Hearst was pardoned by both Carter and Clinton. And then Willie McCovey was pardoned by President Obama. Interestingly, with President Nixon, remember the whole Watergate scandal had occurred, and what was happening was he was about to get, they were about to start impeaching him, and they were about to file the articles of impeachment for him based upon this Watergate scandal, and he knew that once they had filed the impeachment process, and once they started that process, then he would probably be impeached, and he would not be able to be pardoned. So if you guys have ever seen that famous address when he goes on the television and says that he's going to resign the presidency and all of that, he was doing that so that his vice president, when he resigned, his vice president, President Ford, who then took over as president, then could immediately pardon him for the Watergate issues and things like that. So that's a little issue there that I think is interesting with the whole pardon thing. And they kind of started, they thought they were going to impeach Clinton and all of these other things, but that never ended up happening. But anyway, so as I digress. But back to the point. So the president does have the ability to pardon people as well as the governor, and these are all things that are going to happen after an appeals process. And so I'm told not to keep these videos too long, so I'm going to end on that note, and be sure to do your readings and your discussion boards and all of that good stuff, and I will talk to you all next week. Bye.